Welcome to the video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at this cool little thing here. This is a QX90 quadcopter. Now there are a couple of things on here I'm going to point out that are 3D printed that I've added to it, but this one has come from Hobby King. I need to say a very big thank you to those guys. Amazingly, this little thing is only about £48.36, so it's less than 50 quid. And what a load of fun. In terms of bang for the buck, I think this is probably the most fun model that we've featured on the entire channel. Now what this actually is a little indoor FPV quadcopter. So I've been interested in these kind of things, and we're looking at them on the channel because what I'd like is to have a couple of choices for when those dark winter days where it's howling outside, throwing down, and I'd like to do some flying and keep my FPV skills in. Then something like this is absolutely perfect. I also got a couple of local friends that were thinking of doing things like hiring a sports hall to do like little FPV races as well. Now this is very much kind of the semi-professional version of something that we actually have made before on the channel. Now we actually took one of these things here and we actually added a little camera on it. You can go and see the video review of it and how we actually added the camera to it as well, and it is fabulous fun. The actual quad itself is about 15 quid, the camera is about 20 something, so for about 40 quid you can have an FPV setup. All you need to do is add a set of cheap and cheerful goggles. Now the only downside of course with this is this little toy grade transmitter. Now this isn't bad if you're learning, and it still is useful. You can still fly with it fine, but for those of you that are flying in the summer with something like a Tyrannus, then this is fabulous, because actually what this is, believe it or not, is this is an F3 based flight controller with brushed speed controllers out for these little 8mm motors out here at the ends, and it also has a little bind and fly FrSky receiver in here as well. Now I'm going to show you the model in a second, but it means that this thing is actually running clean flight. So a lot of the stuff that we're playing with on the bigger quads, clean flight settings, all those other bits and pieces, FrSky models, all that jazz is absolutely all on here in miniature. So let me just point out before I do that, actually there are two things on this model that you don't get as standard that I've actually added, just because at the moment I'm flying it indoors and I don't want to take a chunk out of a large screen TV or something like that when I'm zooming around the lounge. These prop guards are designed and 3D printed by us here. You can get them from Thingiverse, so if you're interested in printing a set yourself, they just push onto the top of the props. They provide just enough clearance, so if you are kind of banging and hovering around, then the props won't catch anything. And then the other thing I've got here is a little battery strap. You get two batteries in the kit. They're both 600 milliamp hour, 3.7 volts single cell LiPo batteries, and you get double-sided tape that I'm about to show you. Those two things, as I said, are on Thingiverse. You don't necessarily need them, you can fly without them. It's just I've added them in here because I tend to get a little bit carried away with myself and I tend to crash into stuff. So inside the box that it all comes in, there's a load of extra bits as well. You get a charging cable that has a 2-cell LiPo adapter at one end, and then it has the cables at each end for charging. Again, something that I've done here is I've just taken one of those cables, found them on eBay and bought them, and then just put a Dean's on the other end. It means I can charge it with my battery charger easily, just charge it as a 1-cell LiPo. In addition to that, you get another battery. I keep charging and using this one. The batteries last about 7 or 8 minutes anyway, depending on how you fly, but there are two in the kit. You also get a spare set of props, and these props are very nice actually. They're not the standard Hubsan ones that I've had on some other models. They work really well and they seem to take crashes well too. A couple of spare motors, a clockwise and a counterclockwise. You can tell the difference because they have different coloured wires on them. I'll bring them up. One's white and black, the other's red and blue. If you flip this little guy over, you'll see that the red and black are in one set of corners and the white and black are in the other. Red and blue, I apologise, red and blue on these, white and black on the other. This is a brushed model, so unfortunately the brush motors will wear out. It's nice that you get a couple of spare ones in the kit, because occasionally if you hit them too hard you can also pop the brushes out of the bottom as well. I've done that before today. And then apart from that, you get a little tool that's just used for taking the props off, and the way I tend to use that is just get it under the prop. Let me try and get it so you can see. Under the prop, and then while it's right under the middle, it's gently pry it up. You want to be really gentle pushing things in and out of the tops of the props, just because you don't want to push down too hard, because you can pop the can off the bottom. So when you're putting the props on, just support the bottom of the motor with the other finger while you're pushing it home. You get some double-sided foam to mount the batteries. It's a terrible idea, which is why we ended up doing this. Or the other thing you could do is use an elastic band onto these two little hooks, which is what is holding the FPV camera onto the top. You get some Hobby King bits and pieces about charging and being careful and not blowing yourself up. And then you get the manual. Now this manual itself is really quite nice. It's full colour and it goes through all of the pieces, including how you set this model up. What you do on the radio, so for example you need to go into the Taranis, make sure it's in D8 mode and go into bind. My Taranis here at the moment is running non-EU firmware, and that's because a lot of the stuff that we've been testing is the bind and flies, and it's bound beautifully to the receiver that comes in this machine. Also a friend of mine's got one as well. He's one of the guys that we'll probably do the racing with over winter, and he has the EU firmware on his radio, and that's bound to it fine as well. So let me just show you what the model looks like on the Taranis very quickly.
Welcome to Taranis, angle mode.
So I've set it up here to be almost exactly the same as my other models, which use clean flight. So if I go into menu, you'll see here that we have throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, and SE is the mode switch, and then we have all of that going out the other side. And what I've done is I've just limited the endpoint slightly, because as usual the Taranis was overdriving the channels above 2000 and below 1000, so that all works perfectly. If you're not familiar with clean flight and those things, we have lots of other playlists on the channels that you can go and watch. I don't intend to go through it, but what we'll do now is let me just plug this into clean flight and let's have a very quick look at how this little guy's set up. So here we are in clean flight, connected to the quadcopter, so there it is all moving. It's reasonably flat and level, so that looks pretty calibrated to me. Let's have a look how it's all set up. Now there isn't any data flash on this, even though it looks like it's an SP3 type board. It's got a gyro, accelerometer. If we look in the ports, we have pretty standard stuff, to be honest. Configuration, quad X, motor stop is turned on. Pretty standard stuff in here. VBAT's turned on, current meters turned on as well, interestingly. RSSI, ADC, analog inputs turned on. There's lots of stuff turned on that I'm not expecting actually. Transponder is as well. Now as far as I'm aware there's no transponder on this, so the installed settings are a little bit interesting. Now telemetry output, that's normally what we turn on to have telemetry enabled for this kind of board if we want to use something like a full-size FR Sky receiver, but usually you have MSP on something else. Now UART1 has MSP on as well. Interesting. Alright, there's some things on here which I wasn't expecting. Powering by the USB cable has powered the radio, so there is the radio all working. That's great. By default it was throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, auxiliary 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the modes as they first appear. This is how they come set. We're in clean flight 1.13 on this at the moment. So the way it works is that you flick the switch, the mode switch, and that'll both arm and set your machine in angle mode. I like to arm via the sticks. I'm really old-fashioned. So what I'm going to do, get rid of the arming. I'm going to make that angle. I'm going to make that horizon. And then we'll have rate mode at the top. Not sure how it's going to behave like that. Let's save it. So now we have angle mode, horizon
Rate
mode,
mode active.
and then rate mode at the top.
Horizon mode. Angle mode.
And that kind of suits the way I tend to fly. Anything else up on here? Nothing really, to be honest. Sensors are nice and flat. And there's no onboard SD card, so that isn't working. Okay, alright, well, I think I'm pretty confident that the receiver's bound and working. I can see that. Now happy with the modes. Let's go out and have a little fly, see how this thing behaves. The LEDs that are on this thing aren't particularly bright. You can see them indoors. The two LEDs at the front tend to reflect in the lens a little bit. I know some other people have done something like put blue tack over the top. We're going to fly this outside and I'll put some FPV footage in as well. But before we flick to the FPV footage, let me show you how small this thing gets really quickly. So in terms of orientation, even with the red props, once you're about 20 feet away from yourself in anything but ideal conditions outside, you're going to lose orientation. So FPV is definitely the way to fly this little thing at any distance away from you. But hopefully you can see here that the camera's doing a reasonable job. It hasn't got the widest dynamic range, colour saturation's pretty good, it's exposing for the sky, but we can still see everything in the back garden. And even with the light breeze, it's handling it okay. The other comment I'll make here is that the tune in clean flight isn't particularly aggressive. I mean, we're flying here and just pootling around in angle mode just to help me try and keep this thing at the camera, and it isn't super sharp. But this little machine does have a bit of power, not enough for flips and rolls, but if you crank this little guy over, then you can very quickly make it a dot in the sky. And here you can see I'm just flying around. You can kind of see the windsock floating around as well to give you an idea of that little bit of breeze there is. More than a little bit of breeze, I wouldn't like to try and fly this outside. It does get buffeted a lot, and because it doesn't have absolutely tons of power with these little 8mm brushless motors, you wouldn't be able to get out of trouble. Okay, so that's the outside done. Let's go inside and see what it looks like in much darker conditions. So here we're just going to fly around in the hall, and I've also included a little bit of footage here of a hiccup. Now you can see that the camera is doing a very decent job. In the darker conditions, you tend to find that those LEDs are being reflected in the props and in the backs of the motors. Right, there we go, there's the crash. Because we had the prop guards and the other things on as well, and even without, to be honest, it's a pretty robust little model. So all I did was plonked it back down on the floor and we were off flying again. So in summary, what do I think? Well, I was looking for a little quad that would bind up to my Tyrannus, and there's lots and lots of different ones coming out in the market, and this is the first one we've looked at. So I haven't got anything to compare it to apart from that little toy grade that we've already had a look at. But I really like it. This is something that I'm going to be flying around, particularly in the winter, where normally I'd be using something like a little Hubsan or something like that, just to keep my muscle memory going that through those dark months where I'm not flying as much. This is probably going to be something that I'll be flying indoors and annoying everybody over those dark winter months, sat in the lounge with my FPV goggles on. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching, please like, subscribe, and happy flying.